It's the Church of Jesus Christ.
Darwin's theory tells us that man evolved.
The famous film Inherit the Wind is a highly fictionalized account of the famous Scopes trial of 1925, in which a teacher was prosecuted for supposedly teaching Darwinian evolution in the classroom and defended by the ACLU.
It isn't enough that everybody who comes into this courtroom has to pass under a sign which says, "Read your Bible." I want that sign taken down, Your Honor.
No!
Or else I want another sign put up, just as big, with just as big letters, which says, "Read your Darwin."
Though the facts of the movie are far from the actual facts of the Scopes case, which itself was something of a publicity stunt, the movie is best remembered for its caricature of the Christian townspeople, who only wanted biblical creationism taught in schools. How ironic, then, that it is now Darwin's theory of evolution that is protected by law, with all other views being excluded.
I think there's a general problem with our public schools in a lot of different areas. They're really turning education into propaganda, and especially when it comes to the history of science, that they're giving them bad science and not even acquainting students with the debates that have existed and continue to exist in the scientific community on a lot of different things. Certainly the debate over Darwinian evolution is one of them.
Naturalistic evolution has been enshrined in the nation's public schools as the only acceptable theory of human origins. It is protected by the courts to such a degree that one judge ruled that a school district in Dover, Pennsylvania, could not even inform students that there were scientific challenges to evolution, or direct them to critiques of the theory.
The Kitzmiller versus Dover case is a lawsuit that took place in central Pennsylvania back in 2004 and 2005 after a small rural school district passed a policy that required teachers to read a very short statement at the beginning of biology class that basically said, there's this alternative view called intelligent design, and you can read a book about it in the library. Okay, and they had this textbook in the library about intelligent design. That's all it was. It was requiring these teachers to read a short disclaimer and refer students to the library. Well, the ACLU and the Darwin lobby could not stomach this. They could not stomach any favorable mention of ID in the classroom. So they filed a lawsuit, and the judge in that case ultimately ruled against intelligent design.
Perhaps even more amazingly, while public school students are being disallowed from listening to scientific challenges to evolution, they are also in many cases being presented with demonstrably false evidence for evolution. Biologist Jonathan Wells has written a landmark book on this, Icons of Evolution, which demonstrated how popular science textbooks lied to generations of students using false and debunked evidence.
I covered various icons dealing with the origin of life, with the finches on the Galapagos Islands, with the moths on tree trunks.
According to decades of textbooks, when the trees were darkened by industrial pollution, genetics made the moth population darker because they could better avoid predators and survive.
Well, it turns out that the story's a lot more complicated than that. The percentages didn't change the way that they were supposed to. And it came out finally, by the time I wrote the book, that the photos were staged. The light and dark moths were either glued or pinned to the tree trunks, or they were put in place by the photographer and photographed before they could fly away. So the pictures are basically faked. Darwinism is not really science. It's philosophy masquerading as science. So the public schools, which in my opinion have deteriorated a lot since I went to them years ago, are basically indoctrinating children, not educating them.
Almost all textbooks that are used in science, biology, there will be a chapter on mitosis, the cloning process, how copy, how those organisms work. And then you go to the next chapter, and that will be a chapter on meiosis, sexual reproduction, and so forth. First of all, in the chapter on meiosis, there's no mention of the question, how did this ever get started? There's got to be a starting point even for mitosis. Where does the DNA for copy come from? That just can't come from out of the blue. when you get into the chapter on sex, it's just incredible. Almost inevitably, you've got an opening paragraph that says, now, sex by meiosis is different from replication by mitosis. We're no longer talking about copy, but a mixture of the genes from the male and the female. How did that happen? Bad science is just bad science, and it should be dismissed on the basis of being bad science, not on the basis that it is somehow in opposition to the Genesis account of creation.
The consistent brainwashing of young students through our education system has become a great concern for many parents across the country.
I think that what's going on in the public schools is outrageous. The education unions and the national education establishment have become so brazen in their attempt to brainwash and to seize our children from us in their brains, that increasingly parents are saying, no, we want our share of the funding to go to us, and we'll decide where to send them to school, because we want them to be trained in a different way.
And they're not just being brainwashed with Darwinian evolution, they're also pushing radical sex ed, gender ideology, and critical race theory.
They're teaching them all kinds of things about sex and perversions, just incredible things at a very, very young age, K through 12. I mean, the curriculum that they're teaching children. And then they're confusing them, purposely confusing them, creating instances of gender dysphoria at a very, very young age. They talk about systemic racism, they talk about slavery. So a lot of parents, they've gone to school boards and all that, and they've been saying, look, stop the critical race theory stuff. And the teachers and people on school boards saying, look, don't worry about it. No, we're just teaching accurate history. So here's the fallacy, right? We talk about, critical race theory is all about just history or accurate history. So here's the thing. We teach our children how to hate other races, other people, before they even know anything about hatred. Somehow, that's supposed to be good. And that's supposed to be, holistic. That's supposed to be honoring one to another. No, I don't think so. Fundamentally, critical race theory is racist. And it is racist because it is Marxist. And Marxist is racist is because he's Darwinist. You see what I'm saying? There's a whole connection point with all of these philosophies, and we can't ignore them.
But this kind of indoctrination is to be expected when God has been eradicated from the public schools entirely.
I am old enough to remember when we had, after the Pledge of Allegiance, the Lord's Prayer. So God was in the classroom, and I can remember when the courts threw that out. They threw it out on the basis of the Establishment Clause.
The removal of any form of affirmation of God, whether it's a prayer before a football game or a prayer before class, which really is minimal. The removal of the Christian worldview in the various liberal arts and sciences has been far more distressing than the removal of prayer, simply because we're talking about the systematic eradication of a Christian way of thinking. But the result of all of that has been that we now have what C.S. Lewis called a race of educated barbarians.